Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us. Um, I just found this out 20 seconds ago that Clint's mom is here. Where are you, mom? Where are you, mom? Ah, there she is. Of course, I was going to embarrass you in front of your mom, who I'm sure is very proud of you for everything you've accomplished, and of course, all that you have added to this wonderful discussion. Who doesn't love a list? I love a list. The whole point of a list is to fight over the list, I think. And the Atlantic has put out a tremendous list, the Great American Novels, looking at the last 100 years and the best novels. And what I really love about it is you didn't feel pressure to give in to a number. Because a lot of people will, it's very easy to go 100 greatest novels in the last 100 years or something like that, but this is a very uneven, awkward 136. And if you all haven't, please make sure that you get one of these trusty cards here that I think is brilliant and genius because it has a little checkbox in them so you can check off all the novels you've read. You can look at how far you have to go. And even though I'm a career journalist, it really made me feel quite stupid filling that out because I was just like, oh my God, there's so much I haven't read. But do make sure that you get one of those. And more importantly, there's a QR code that's on the back page and you can read the article, the explanation. You can see the digital version of the list itself. So make sure that you check that out so you can further participate in this wonderful discussion. We're gonna get this started. I'm so excited to discuss this because I know there was a lot of debate. It dropped online today. People are already arguing about it, which I love for you all because my name isn't on it, so y'all gotta argue with them. But I wanna start off, and Jane, I'll start with you, but I want you all everybody to answer. To me, the debate over a list, before you debate it, you have to know what are the parameters. And I like for you all to discuss what do you think makes a great American novel? So let's start with sort of the criteria. So Jane, you can go first with that one.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. So I think one way that I could talk about it is to start with the name. The phrase that we used, Great American Novels, you might have a picture of what that looks like in your head. It's an often used phrase. And we sort of wanted to play with that to maybe, make it a little bit unpredictable, to sort of deepen that, to widen it, to maybe subvert what you think a great American novel is. So we thought a lot about how to make that feel capacious. In terms of qualities that we were looking for, I would say, it has to have superlative craft, right? The writing has to be extremely good and original. I think unique voice, some kind of a narrator or a voice that is just transporting you somewhere, doing something that feels wildly different. And then I think, even just looking at the structure of a novel, novels that are doing something that feel interesting and different. So, if they're playing with the form of the novel, if they're sort of structuring their story in ways that feel new and fresh. So I think those are a few that come to mind for me. I'm curious if others have other thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that we were also interested in novels that have big ideas. So those don't just need to be big ideas about war and peace and the nature of human existence. Those can also be big ideas about relationships and family life. So, big ideas about domestic topics. But we wanted to make sure that we were looking at novels that said something profound about what it is to be alive, in addition to being lovely to read.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I appreciate about so many of the novels on this list is they really are emblematic of the idea that there is universality in the granular. I think so many of these books, I'd say almost all of these books are books that are not attempting to be the great American novel in the sense that they are attempting to tell an overarching American story as if there is a single American story, right? I think what they're doing, so many of them are being very specific, being very granular, excavating the specific experiences of different groups of people, different individuals within specific regions, within specific communities, and from those novels and from those characters in very specific places, in small towns, in big cities, and everything in between. I think what the reader experiences and what I've experienced reading so many of these books is a relationship to the characters and the ideas and the themes that exist and are animated by the way that they move through the story and what the story is wrestling with that I think are speak to the characters' experiences, but in doing so speak to a broader set of ideas that are, as Ellen said, like tied to the human experience. And I think that that's one of the really important qualities of a book that succeeds in this way, is that it's not trying to be everything to everybody, but it's trying to tell the story of a very particular person or a very particular group of people, and in doing so tells a story that speaks to the sort of larger human condition.
While I have you on the hook, let me also ask you, why do you think it's important for us to still believe in the great American novel?
For me, the beauty of the great American novel, almost kind of, alluding to what I said before, is that there are so many different strains of Americanness, right? Like, I think we are incredibly unique in the history of the world in that we are attempting to build a multicultural, racially diverse democracy, and to have that project succeed in ways that it hasn't historically succeeded. And I think that having books that reflect the multiplicity, the plurality, the complexity of the American story, that reflect the things that we should be proud of as well as the things that we should be ashamed of, and that try to tell all of those stories. Again, not that one book is going to tell all those stories within itself, but I think one of the great things about a list like this is that you have so many stars that make up the constellation of what is America. And I think that together these create it's almost as if all of these books together are the great American novel, so to speak, but you need all of them. They're all parts of the whole. So I would say that there's not a single novel that is the great American novel, but the assemblage of all of these authors, all of these stories together reflect the complexity, reflect the American project in ways that I think are really powerful and unique.
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I was just going to say that as part of this project, I did some research into the history of the term Great American Novel, which had sort of been in my brain forever, but I didn't know where it came from. And it turned out that it was proposed by a writer, John William DeForest, right after the Civil War. And, this was a moment when the concept of America seemed so fragile. And he was proposing a kind of new American art form, something that could unite the country. His phrase, which I love, was a novel that could paint the soul of America, paraphrasing a little bit. But I find that that was kind of a North Star for this. And I think to Clint's point, all of these novels together, they're so different. We have tiny little novellas, and we have long opuses, or opi, perhaps. Someone fact check me on that. We have so many different kinds of books, but together I do think they paint the soul of America.
So Ellen, take us deeper into the process, because what was the inspiration behind this? How did you all go about, okay, this is how we want to decide what belongs on this list?
Yeah, so, the inspiration for this was that we talk a lot at the Atlantic and just in the world of people who love books about greatness. And we wanted to really think deeply and in a concrete way about what that means and sort of pressure test some of our assumptions about what we're talking about when we're talking about literary greatness. So that's kind of where the sort of intellectual impetus for this project came. The way we did it was we went to experts, meaning subject matter experts, a lot of scholars, professional critics, so people who just read all the time for work, and then authors of novels we admire. And we asked them what they would put on this list. We put all of those in a Google Doc along with our own internal recommendations. Created this spreadsheet that truly crashed my computer every time I tried to open it. It was very long. And we just systematically went through. We really wanted to be rigorous. I don't know how many hours Jane and I and some of our colleagues spent talking about these books, but we wanted to examine each of them and really talk about what makes them great if they are great. And so we kind of eventually just kept whittling down and whittling down and whittling down until we landed on a number that felt complete.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did you know, okay, it's 136, as opposed to 140 or 142, or?
It's a great question. We weren't aiming for 136 before. We knew we didn't want to land on an arbitrary number for no reason. It kind of drives me a little crazy when I read a list that's the top 100 of something, just because I'm desperate to know what was 101. But so we decided that we would just keep going until the list felt complete. And at some point, we just got to a place where it felt complete. We didn't feel like we were missing anything. We sat on it for a while. We sort of let it marinate. We talked to people that we work with who hadn't been as deeply involved with the project, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything huge. And after a while, this list of 136 just felt right.
Well, I felt good because my favorite book is on here. Can't speak for y'all, but
What's your favorite book?
Their Eyes Were Watching God. That's my favorite book of all time, so very happy with that, yes. Made the list, but not everybody's fave made the list. And as I mentioned, the piece dropped on the Atlantic's website today. You all can check it out, but already you're hearing some feedback. So far, what has been the biggest debate that has come out of it? What are the naysayers saying about, it's already complaining about with this list?
This list is subjective. Just saying that out loud, it's subjective.
You know it's gonna be good if you hit us with the qualifier first.
The biggest debate that people are having about this list is about the omission of To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a book we talked about a lot. We didn't forget about it. We talked about it, and we wanted to be really rigorous, and we wanted to not be too dutiful about this list. We didn't just want to copy paste from school syllabi around the country and call it a day. We wanted to really consider whether these books stand the test of time. It turns out a lot do. We have Gatsby and Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Faulkner and Steinbeck, and some of the classics that a lot of us read as teens. But with To Kill a Mockingbird, we re-examined it, and we felt like it just didn't hold up. And I don't mean that its politics don't perfectly map onto the politics of 2024. What I mean is that we felt like there were other novels that were exploring the themes that Lee was exploring. So, duty and family and justice and race and goodness, but we're doing it in a more sophisticated way. Ultimately we felt like, and we talked about it for a long time, we felt like it was not quite as successfully doing the thing it was trying to do as other books that are out there. I know this is a controversial opinion. You can find me later and argue with me. But I would say that's the biggest debate. I don't know, Jane, if you've seen anything else.
There have been some other things that people have taken exception to. I think some folks have, one sort of strand of argument has been why this novel rather than that novel from the author. And I think we've seen that with, probably with, maybe with
Updike,
maybe Highsmith as well.
Yeah, Highsmith. We went for a less well-known Highsmith.
For Pynchon as well, we chose Crying of Lot 49 rather than Gravity's Rainbow. A couple of others like that. And I think in those kinds of situations, we also talked those out. We as Ellen mentioned, we had our experts, folks that were recommending books that they felt were the ones that we should include. And in the course of conversation, sometimes we went for a slightly unexpected pick, something that felt like it would just add to the mix in a way that felt, just a little fresher. And then in some cases, we just thought they were better. And we'll just have to fight about it if there is a little bit of disagreement on that front. But
Well,
that's part of the beauty of it too, right?
I'm glad you brought that up about how in some cases you didn't necessarily include maybe the book the author is most well known for. Like we were discussing backstage about how Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye is not on this book, is not on this list, but there are several other of her books that are. Clint, you went with Giovanni's Room in Another Country by James Baldwin in terms of putting them on this list. I mean, obviously for a lot of people, that's maybe not the first book that comes to mind with James Baldwin. So was that something that you wrestled with? And just give us some insight about how you arrived at that decision.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about so many of these writers is that many of them weren't just novelists. Like, many of them were short story writers, many of them were essayists, many of them were journalists. And so Baldwin is somebody who, for many of us, is known more so for his essays than he is for his novels. But he wrote plays, he wrote novels, he wrote poems, he wrote short stories. And so, one of the reasons that I thought it was important to have Giovanni's Room here is because, one, I think it's an excellent novel and reflects the quality of prose that we find in Baldwin's essays, but transported into fiction. And it also, I think, reflects the courage of Baldwin. Baldwin's publisher, when Baldwin said that he was going to write Giovanni's Room, and he went to his publisher and told them what it was about two men in love and what their relationship was like, his publisher said that they weren't going to publish it. And they said that this is going to ruin your career, you're going to alienate all of your readers. You are somebody who's supposed to write about race, you write about black people and white people, and you should basically stay in your lane. Like, don't write about this thing that, again, in the 1960s, 1950s, was really risky and was not a part of our social and collective discourse in the way that it is now. But he refused, and so he published that book with a different publisher than his original publisher. And I think he also rejected the idea that his lane was writing about race, because Baldwin was a queer man, and he was like, this is a part of me, this is a part of the human experience, the human condition, that is not reflected in American literature in ways that are commensurate with the experiences of the millions of queer people who live here, who may not necessarily, be able to say that they are queer in, the 1950s and 1960s, but that it reflects a part of their experience in America and beyond, because obviously the book is set, not even in America, it's set in France. But I think it just was something that reflected a part of Baldwin's larger project that isn't always accounted for. Like, we talk about his letter to his nephew, we talk about his incredible oratory skills, but he was also like it also reflects a different part of his, a different iteration of his skill set, because it's not polemic, it's not fiery, it is really exploring the sort of soft interiority of so many of these characters whose lives have not always, again, been taken seriously in the form of the novel previously.
For those who don't know, Clint is actually from here. He's from New Orleans, and one of the books that is on the list writes to an experience that you know all too well about Hurricane Katrina, because that was something that you experienced when you were in high school. Jessamine Ward's Salvage the Bones. Jessamine and I will be having a conversation after this panel, so please do stick around for that, to talk about Salvage the Bones and other works. That novel made the list. For you being from here, talk about that novel and why it is important that something like that be represented on a list like this one.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the more recent novels on the list that was published in 2011. And if you haven't read Salvage the Bones, it is Jessamine Ward is one of our great American novelists in the history of American writing. And so you're incredibly lucky to be able to hear from her today. And, Salvage the Bones, similar to what Baldwin did in the context of Two Queer Men, part of what Jesmyn does in Salvage the Bones is take the lives of like Southern Mississippi teenagers and like render them so full and so complex and so human in ways that, again, like Southern Black teenagers are not always presented. And it really pushes back, and again, not in a polemic way, not in a didactic way, not in a preachy way, but, and I think this is the power of what a novel can do, is that it can illuminate the humanity of people in a different part of the world, in a different part of the country, people who you might not otherwise engage with and interact with, on a daily basis, and present their lives as being so rich and so, again, complicated in the ways that all of our lives are. And in doing so, you don't have to be a 13-year-old girl in Southern Mississippi in order to understand the protagonist of that story, in order to resonate with the protagonist of that story, because something about that young girl speaks to something inside of all of us. And I think that book is sort of exemplary in the way that it does that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's a newer book, and I think that's also one of the beauties of this list, is that it is very inclusive regarding, era, genre, new, old. And Jane, I want to ask you this, along those same lines, with the newer books, because you have like The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, Nevada, Imogen Benny. Just give us some insight about the approach and the thought process behind adding some of the more newer novels to a list like this.
This was actually one of the hardest parts of coming up with this list, because we didn't want to over-index on, recent novels that we'd all read and were excited about. But we also wanted to make sure that, we had good representation from the more recent novels that have been published, of which there are so many great ones. And so, excuse me. And so, we really did talk about it a lot. And, I think the way we ended up thinking about it was, what are the ones that are gonna, last in our memories? Like, what are the ones that really feel like, they're already on their way to becoming some form of a new classic, in whatever way that might be, and it might be different for a different kind of book. And so, something like The Sympathizer, I think it's a really good example of a novel that is taking a really big, again, talking about big ideas, it took, Vietnam War, which had, often been written about in a certain way, and just flips it, right, and writes about it from a completely different perspective, and not just, a Vietnamese narrator, but, this is a North Vietnamese mole in a South Vietnamese army, then after the war, continues to embed in a South Vietnamese community in the States in exile. And it's, what does it mean to be both sort of a mole and an immigrant? There's a lot that's really interesting. It's fascinating to sort of see the layers in the book, and, it kind of speaks to the fractured consciousness and the sort of fractured identity that a lot of, recent immigrants might feel, and, it speaks to, a lot of the sorts of questions of identity and belonging, but in a way that felt super different. And so, we thought about what some of those things could be when we were looking at these books. And something like Nevada, just really quickly, Imogen Benny is, she's a young writer. This book came out in I want to say the 2010s, and tiny press, and then went quickly out of print. And then the fans kept it alive, and then it just got picked up by a slightly bigger press, and got reissued. And it's it's a new classic of trans literature. We have a trans protagonist who is instantly memorable. You just don't want to stop hanging out with her. It's just really fun. She's snobby and annoying and cranky, but also just really charismatic, and you just kind of want to be there on the journey with her. And so that kind of that sort of feeling of I'm going to remember this was, again, subjective, but part of our decision-making process, I would say.
All right, well, let's get even more subjective. I'm going to ask each of you to name the one book that if you had magical powers that you can put in everyone's hand from this list. And Ellen, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Jemele.
I know. I gave you the easy ones because I like you.
There are many books on this list that I wish I could just kind of like put in everyone's brain, but the one I will talk about is Mumbo Jumbo by Ishmael Reed, which I hadn't read before this project, but I'd heard of, and I picked it up in the course of researching this project and ended up writing a blurb about it for the list. It is this like very richly textured, I describe it as a collage in my write-up, and it really feels that way. It starts as a movie script, and it contains like original artwork, and there are parts of it that are like a newspaper, and it has footnotes, and it sort of is doing kind of like that really rich, metafictional thing relatively early, but it just also has this amazing plot. It's about this virus that is sweeping the nation. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The symptoms of this virus are like wild dancing and laughter and appreciation of Black culture. And the establishment in the novel is so freaked out by this. And it's sort of about, it's imagining this world where there are all kinds of conspiracy theories about it, and there are all kinds of people who are trying to figure out what's going on. But it's rendered in this really unforgettable way where there's just so much in it. He incorporates like the entire history of religion, and he incorporates, Egyptology, and he goes down these tangents, and it's just so fun to get to spend some time in his brain. So if you haven't read Mumbo Jumbo, you should pick it up.
I mean, for a second, that sounded like the plot of Footloose. I was like, where are we going with this?
Yeah, Footloose is actually based on Mumbo Jumbo.
Yeah, okay. It all makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, Jane, what's your one book?
This is really hard, but I'm going to pick a recent one since I'm going down that lane anyway. Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson is a book that is just, it's very simple in a way, and it has a sort of unbelievable conceit. This young woman sort of becomes the caretaker for these two young kids who, when they're upset about something or when they're feeling emotional, just burst into flames. And the way that Wilson just takes this unrealistic scenario and treats it with such care and gives us very realistic solutions to kids bursting into flames is just, it's really lovely to read and follow along, and ultimately it's a story about how to take care of each other. And so, it's this story about found family. It's entertaining. It is, a book that honestly, I read in a day. It was a quick read, but I keep talking about it, and I'll keep talking about it on the stage, I guess. So I think that would be my pick.
I would say I'll pick another recent one, The Namesake by Jemele Lahiri. I'm like the president of the Jemele Lahiri fan club. Every single one of her books is incredible to me. It's interesting because it reflects someone who to some people is more well known for her short stories. I mean, Interpreter of Maladies, she won the Pulitzer Prize for it when she was 32. But like much of her work, it is exploring the experience of Indian immigrants and South Asian immigrants to the United States, and the sort of tension between the parents and then the kids who are born here, and how do the kids think about what they carry and the lineage they carry from abroad, while also attempting to assimilate into a sort of understood quintessential Americanness, and what is Americanness, what version of that are they trying to assimilate into? And I think it's reflective of what I was saying before about how, I'm not an immigrant, I'm not South Asian, and yet these books speak to me in ways that are just so profound and so remarkable, and I'm so grateful for them. I also want to say, before our time is up, you might be like, man, 136 novels, that's too much. Like, that's sweet, Atlantic, but no thanks. But I did the math. Let's say, so there's 136 novels. Let's say on average, 400 pages. So that's 54,400 pages. Let's say it takes you 2 minutes to read each page. So that's, I'm not gonna do all the math, but like you keep going down, 108,800 minutes divided by 60, 1,813 hours. If you read for 1 hour every day, you can read all of these books in 5 years. So,
Pretty good.
it's much more manageable than you think.
All right, well, here's some other stats, not as fun as that one. PEN America study found 3,300 books were banned in the 2022-2023 school year, which was a 33% increase from the previous school year. 44% of the novels that are on this Atlantic list have been banned in some capacity. So among the many reasons why this list is so important is that it is another opportunity for us to keep this alive and to think very seriously about what these book bans are doing to the future of storytelling and education. We'll actually continue more discussion on that with Jemele in a minute, but I wanted to thank you all for joining us. Read the list. You have the QR code. 1 hour a day, people. You can read all of these books in 5 years. A warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, Clint, Jane, Ellen. Thank you, Clint's mama. We appreciate you as well. Good night, everybody.